for raising important issues tonight, providing additional political momentum ahead of the COP. I appreciate your commitment to maintain the European Union's role as a leader in the field of international climate action. A strong and united European Union messaging will be instrumental to deliver. After Sham, our work must continue both domestically and internationally, and to help our partners to advance their transition to a low-carbon, climate-resilient economy. Thank you again for the opportunity of having this debate. The Commission looks forward to continuing the important dialogue with this House, working together for a successful outcome of Sham. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. That's the end of the debate. There's one motion for a resolution winding up the debate, and that vote will be held on Thursday. The next item on the agenda is a Commission statement on the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine on migration flows to the EU. On behalf of the Commission, I give the floor once again to Commissioner Johansson.
Thank you very much, President. I spoke to this House on the impact of war on the 8th of March, 12 days after the start of Putin's invasion. And that was 5 days after the Member States swiftly and unanimously agreed to my proposal to activate the Temporary Protection Directive, giving Ukrainian refugees immediate protection in the European Union. I said that day, on the 8th of March, more is to come, worse is to come, millions more will flee. And more did come, worse did come. Bucha, Izium, mass graves, torture, murder, rape. And more than 4.3 million Ukrainians have now registered for temporary protection in the European Union. But what I could not predict is the extraordinary response by Member States and European citizens, racing to the challenge, housing refugees, providing access to healthcare and jobs, and places in school for nearly 650,000 Ukrainian children today. In those early days, I could also not predict many would soon return to Ukraine to fight, to support their country and their families. 2 weeks ago, I met with the mayor of Bucha. He told me 70% of his citizens had already come back. But as Putin losses on the battlefield increase, so do his attacks on civilians. Missile attacks killing innocent people. Daily strikes against the water supply and electricity supply. People could soon feel forced to flee Ukraine again. They must be sure they can do so safe in the knowledge that our doors remain open. That's what I told ministers at last Friday's Justice and Home Affairs Council, and they agreed. When people return to the EU, protection status will be swiftly reactivated. Ministers also agreed with the need to continue applying the Temporary Protection Directive for another year, until March 2024. I also discussed with ministers what winter may bring, and we are ready. We have been working closely with Member States on a common view on a contingency plan, and are ready for new arrivals. And we have allocated the full €400 million in emergency assistance promised to support Member States' reception system and border management. And we made sure 30% of those funds will go to NGOs and local authorities. And for all those still in the European Union receiving protection, we are helping them to find their way into the labour market Last week, I launched a talent pool pilot together with Commissioner Schmidt, an online search tool under the Aeros portal, together with Anna, a student from Donbass, and Vera, an engineer from Kiev, the first two to register. They now can apply for more than 3 million vacancies across the EU, and 4,000 verified employers can find their CVs. After mobilization, we have not seen a large number of Russians arriving in the EU, but we must be vigilant. Putin's illegal annexation, mobilization, nuclear threat. Danger is rising, so must our level of protection. That's why the Commission put forward guidelines to make it much more difficult for Russians to enter the European Union on tourist visas, and with coordinated and thorough controls of Russian citizens at EU's external borders. But Europe remains open for those in need of protection, for dissidents, for journalists. We do not yet see the war affecting migration from other parts of the world to the EU. We will continue to monitor developments closely and act accordingly. To end this crisis, first, Putin must lose. Seeking to divide us, Putin has only united us. And second, we need the Pact on Migration and Asylum. I'm very glad that we already had the Preparedness and Crisis Blueprint Network in place, providing information critical for swift and decisive action. And I'm very glad that the EU Asylum Agency is in place with its reinforced mandate, giving stronger support to Member States. Now we must put the rest of the pact in place. And I'm confident the cooperation between the presidencies and the Parliament is unprecedented. The roadmap is very important, showing a clear way forward, and an ambition that has proven evasive for so many years. So let's build on that to reach an agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Now we move on to political group spokesman on behalf of the European People's Party, Mr. Lenners, for 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Russian invasion of Ukraine had, of course, a huge and a direct impact on migration flows to the EU. More than 11 million Ukrainians crossed the border of the European Union. A significant number has returned indeed, but over 4 million of them have registered for temporary protection in the EU. And the EU delivered on this TPD. And we can be proud about how millions of refugees received a warm welcome all over Europe, particularly in countries bordering Ukraine: Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Moldova. It has been really impressive to see all the efforts by citizens and communities to take care of vulnerable people. But the migration challenge is not restricted to migration flows directly from Ukraine. In the first 9 months of this year, more than 228,000 migrants irregularly crossed the external borders of the EU, the highest number since 2016. For 3 consecutive months, there were more than 70,000 asylum applications per month in the EU. Again, the last time this happened was in 2016, crisis time. On the Western Balkan routes, we see an increase of almost 200% compared to last year, mainly due also to the scandalous visa policy of Serbia, which I hope the Commission will address without delay. We are sleepwalking towards another migration crisis, and we already see Member States reaching the limits of reception capacity. So we need to act. We can point fingers to Member States and agencies as much as we want, but we need to do our job as a Parliament by making real progress on the Pact on Migration, to make sure it is adopted as soon as possible. We cannot allow any further delays. Let's get to work. Thank you.
Thanks very much. On behalf of the S&D Group, Mr. López Aguilar has the floor now for 2 minutes, please.
Gracias, señor presidente, comisaria Johansson.
President, Commissioner, the facts speak for themselves. Data speaks for itself, but facts too. Since the war broke out, waged by Putin on Ukraine, we've seen a huge wave of migration. A third of the people of Ukraine, 11 million people, have spilled onto European soil. And as you've said, some 7 million people have actually returned to their native Ukraine because of family contacts, and they're free to do so. But at least 4 million, and 90% of them are women and children who can't defend themselves. And they enjoy protection under the Temporary Protection Directive. They have visa-free access to Schengen. They can put down roots. They can enjoy gainful employment, and they can access benefits. But this has all required a lot of effort from the European Parliament to ensure that the member states have provided financial assistance. That's been done under CARE and under REACT, and it's also due to an increase in AMIF, some 400 million extra euros, in order to help people who have been displaced, particularly in border countries. And then they have also been able to enjoy free movement throughout the EU. Many of these migrants, these Ukrainian migrants, have come to Spain. When there's a will, there's a way, and vice versa. We could have done all of this before. We finally invoked the Temporary Protection Directive. And even though there's been 4 million people coming into Europe, it hasn't caused a collapse to the social welfare system. We could have activated this directive before, and we need a roadmap from you, Commissioner, so that we can move forward with the 5 pieces of legislation related to migration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lopez Aguilar. Now, for 1 minute, Ms. Keller.
Monsieur le Président,
President, Madam Commissioner, dear Ylva JOHANSSON, Putin's war in Ukraine has repercussions well beyond the European continent. According to the FAO, the number of people who are malnourished in the world might go from 8 to 19 million between 2022 and 2023 as a result of the war in Ukraine. Food insecurity across the globe is an important factor linked to migration. Between January and June of this year, the European Union received 410,000 requests for asylum, whereas it had received half that number the previous year, and we've seen a rise in applications from Tunisians and Egyptians, and the situation is likely to deteriorate in months to come, Madam Commissioner. Now, I want to know if the Commission is analysing migratory flows in third countries in order perhaps to anticipate some of these asylum requests, and also what about assistance to third countries? I very much regret the fact that the Council is not here this evening. Speaker is cut off. Thank you very much, Madam Keller. Now, for 1 minute, Ms. Strick.
counts numerous victims. Refugees from Ukraine deserve our unconditional support, no matter how long, no matter how many. So we warmly welcome the extended application of the Temporary Protection Directive. But the Russian aggression also affects citizens of Russia and Belarus who don't choose the side of Putin. Human rights defenders, journalists who speak out are persecuted. Deserters and draft evaders who don't want to fight this cruel war are under a risk as well, as Putin perceives them as traitors. The EU must keep its channels open to protect those who are under threat. The right to asylum is neutral and universal and cannot be ignored just for political reasons. So people who arrive at our borders must be able to apply for asylum, and I call upon the Commission to monitor compliance by the Member States. Unlike the authoritarian Kremlin regime, we respect the rule of law, and only by upholding our values we can win this war. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Strick. And now for 1 minute, Mr. Fest.
President, Commissioner, it's always the same. more and more refugees, you appear and you say the same nonsense. You talk about border management. The truth is you don't have anything under control. With Schengen, the external borders should be protected, but that has failed. There is mass migration, not just from Ukraine, but from India, Burundi, Tunisia. There is a migrant or a refugee disaster. If we look back to 2015, many promises were made. We heard that such figures would never be repeated. But look, okay, you're just looking at your phone. It's nicer to look at your phone, Commissioner, rather than to look at me. Maybe you should look at me and then you might learn something. You speak about integration into the labour market. That is also a lie. Throughout the EU, in every European country, these people are not becoming integrated. Labour market integration measures only work insofar as they bring the money. So there's been complete failure. You need to draw conclusions from that. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Fest.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fest. Now for 1.5 minutes, Mr. Jaki.
Przewodniczący, pani komisarz, otóż, szanowni państwo, powiedzmy sobie wprost. Jest jedno państwo w Unii Europejskiej, które od początku do końca mocno stoi po stronie Ukrainy i bierze na siebie największy ciężar pomocy. I tym państwem jest Polska. Od 24 lutego, czyli dnia początku agresji Rosji, granicę polsko-ukraińską przekroczyło 7 milionów uchodźców z Ukrainy, informuje Straż Graniczna.
We saw 7 million people cross the border, mostly children and women. Now, their cost of their subsistence in 2022 will reach 40 billion euro. That's a record in Europe. But that's not everything. It would have to be multiplied because we need to spend 1 million zloty for education, and the cost of medical assistance to them is 200 million zloty per month. Not to mention individual costs borne by Polish people who accommodated their Ukrainian refugees in the homes. We provide them with everything. We are supplying them with everything. And what are you doing? You're saying that you are supporting Ukraine, you're wearing the ribbons, very pretty, and you're sanctioning Poland at the same time. Not only did you not give us any money to support Ukraine, but you took away from us 160 billion from the and now you are sanctioning us with stopping the cohesion policy. So I don't want to listen to you saying how poor the people from Ukraine are. Give us money that we need to help them. Otherwise, you are helping Putin. He likes you. Keep on talking rather than helping Poland and Ukraine. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Jack.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jaki. And now for 1 minute, Ms. Ernst. Thank you very much. Each and every individual refugee from Ukraine is worthy of our protection. This applies to all people from Ukraine. Now, there are problems at the borders. We've got third country nationals who are working there or who are present there in some capacity. You've got students or you've got people who are simply unwilling to take up arms. And so that is why we also want protection to be extended to members of the Russian opposition as well as conscientious objectors, and we need rules for that as well as open channels. And, you know, from everything you said, it is clear that those channels do not exist. These people need humanitarian visas as well, and we need to distribute them across all countries of the EU, not just to some countries. And also we must put an end to the deportation of such individuals, because this is a moral issue when all is said and done, as to whether these people are afforded protection. The best way of ending a war is for nobody to go off to war.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Ernst.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ernst. And now Ms. Gall for 1 minute.
Elnök úr, biztos asszony, Magyarország történetének legnagyobb humanitárius akciója keretében rendkívüli erőfeszítéseket tesz az ukrán menekültek fogadása érdekében. Az egyik legtöbb ukrán menekültet befogadó uniós tagállam vagyunk lakosságarányosan. A menekültek ellátása folyamatos.
Colleague, sorry, we have no translation. I think you have to restart. Wait a second, please. Haben wir Dolmetschung aus dem Ungarischen?
Do we have interpretation from Hungarian?
Interesting.
Okay. It was only a technical problem. Please start again. Yes, please start again. You can start.
Start again. Okay, thank you. Magyarország történetének legnagyobb humanitárius akciója.
Thank you very much. Hungary has provided a great deal of humanitarian assistance and has welcomed many Ukrainian migrants and refugees. In proportional terms, we have welcomed the most Ukrainian nationals. Many children have been offered places in school. Care has been provided in hospitals and elsewhere. In addition to that, we are sending many resources to Ukraine. In addition, we are making other contributions by helping to provide care for soldiers. Many children and their parents, their mothers have come to Hungary, but when it comes to the south and their illegal migration from there, it's mainly men who are coming. Often there are attacks that they carry out on border soldiers. That's why we need to step up protection at the borders. The member states need to be provided with support if they protect our borders. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. 1.5 minutes now, Mr. Rangel.
Herr Vorsitzender, Madam Commissioner, a guerra de agressão russa.
The Russian war against Ukraine has got various aspects which are increasing the migratory flows and need for humanitarian aid in the European Union. As far as Ukrainian citizens who fled is concerned, we had a very fine response in Europe. We've helped those families very much. We have waiting for them and put them in conditions where they will be able to go back. But there's also now an increase in the violence of the Russian attacks, and so there's a new wave of Ukrainian refugees trying to get through in conditions that are much worse than they were a few weeks ago. But there's a very important point, which is that now Serbia, which has visa-free agreements with various countries, is increasing another flow of migrants towards Europe from Cuba, India, Tunisia and Burundi. In the various European borders, Hungary, Croatia, Greece, in part Bulgaria and Romania, we are seeing this new migratory flow arrive, which is basically done as Lukashenko is doing in Belarus, having the largest number of people packed into the European area to create stress on Europe's borders. We can't accept Serbia's actions and we need to condemn it unreservedly. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rangel. And now for 1 minute, Mr. Bartolo.
Grazie, Presidente. Grazie.
Thanks very much, President. Thank you, Commissioner. The horrors of this war are continuing under the jaded eyes of many of us, and with the acceptance of a large part of the international community. There's more and more bombardments, more and more civilian victims, people forced to leave everything behind and flee, increasing the migratory flows towards Europe, which has accepted them. And they've shown solidarity. But unfortunately, we are tragically letting slip the opportunity to have a systematic reform of our migration and asylum policy. So I ask the Commission, is it going to be possible in a future to think it's almost upon us to do the same for those citizens in parts of Asia and Africa who depend on Russia and the Ukraine for their food requirements? Will we allow them to knock on our doors as we had done with citizens of the Ukraine? Or will we consider them to be victims of exploitation, or even worse, will we reject them as enemies, possibly with the complicity of certain European agencies? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bartolo. And now for 1 minute, Ms. Che.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner, dear colleagues. A few days after the war broke out, I went to the Hungarian-Ukrainian border And it was absolutely heartbreaking to see the families, the small children, the women who needed to pack up their lives and leave their homes because of Putin's criminal war. But as we know, the darkest times often inspire the kindest acts. People showed up to cook warm food. Local governments set up hotlines, temporary shelters. They housed refugees in schools, in public buildings. Small town mayors suddenly became international humanitarians. We saw the same things at the Polish border and all across the EU. We rely on these communities, on local governments, on civil society organizations. They are the face Europe shows in this crisis, and it's a beautiful face. But right now, they also need Europe's help, because in some member states, the government sadly does not look at them as partners. On the contrary, many are on the brink of bankruptcy because of the rising energy costs. So it's time to give them more direct support. I was happy to hear about the increasing rate of direct funds, but we need to do more. We need to be there for them. They are there for us and they need our help. They are on the front lines. We need them more than ever. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chair. And now for 1 minute, Mr. Karim.
Monsieur le Président, Madame la
President, Commissioner, the European Union and its member states have demonstrated extraordinary solidarity since the onset of the war by taking in so many refugees. And we owe that first and foremost to European citizens. 49% of those who have fled have been taken in by families or volunteers over the summer. But we're going to need to come up with longer-term solutions, because we've let in people fleeing Ukraine, but we discriminate against others and even turn back others with the collusion of Frontex. Now, we do fear a return of food riots, and other colleagues are worried about migratory flows which might submerge Europe, as the saying goes. And that is why, more than ever before, we need solidarity both within and outside Europe. We've identified the root causes of migration. It's important, therefore, that the European Union take preventive action in order not to have to exhaust this approach now. We need a desirable societal model which is ecologically just. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Karim. And now for 1.5 minutes, Mr. Rouget.
Monsieur le Président.
President, colleagues. Many victims in Verdun, 1 million who died in the Somme, 20 million who died after that First World War, 60 million. That's the terrible death toll after the Second World War. And some say that history always repeats itself. Have we therefore learned nothing from these wars, from this barbarism, and from the occupation of Strasbourg? Will we once again submit to another European tragedy with this attack by Russia on Ukraine? Back in the year 2012, the EU was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. What remains of that? Just very little. We are moving towards a bellicose attitude rather than seeking out peace. And if the EU fails to do what it should and doesn't shoulder its responsibility as a body ensuring peace, well, then it will be up to France. France will work with NATO, Ukraine and Russia and bring those three bodies around the table. France will bring these parties around the table to prevent this conflict from escalating further. And when that happens, you can believe that whatever your nationality is, whatever group you belong to, believe that our children, our grandchildren, will thank us for what we have done.
Roger.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rouget. Now for 1.5 minutes, Mr. Sofo.
Commissario Johansson.
Commissioner Johansson, the most recent Eurostat figures say that 100 million Europeans are living today in poverty. 1 in every 5 citizens, and Italy is top of this league of economic hardship. The Ukrainian conflict has brought 11 million into Europe, added to the 2 million already on our shores. People who are directly involved and people who have a moral duty to help. But we haven't got enough resources to do so because there's another emergency caused by the suicidal policies of the EU. 13 million refugees, in fact, in our continent, and 5 million illegal immigrants because of the landings which reached a record of 230 last year. We need, therefore, to do something with our social security systems, which are on the verge of collapse. With a world of scarce resources, it's more important than ever for the European Union to stop its open door policy and be braver when it comes to repatriation and have humanitarian systems which help those only who deserve to be helped. Otherwise, it's going to be like the Korean show Squid Game, with a sadistic way of eliminating some of these poor people who fight one another to try to get hold of the scarce resources allotted for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sofo. Now for 1 minute, Ms. Ferrara.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. The military conflict in Ukraine is continuing to cause victims of destruction, and people are therefore fleeing for security and protection. We've got about 4.25 Ukrainian refugees who are registered in the European Union and are being afforded temporary protection. It's an unprecedented situation. We are having to provide financial support as well as housing, food, access to healthcare, particularly for women and minors who are the most exposed to discrimination as well as abuse. When it comes to food security, energy prices are leading to a crisis and more movement from third countries towards the European Union. We need to reform the common asylum policies. It can no longer be put off. We need to put the house in order. We must give a speedy response to requests and shoulder our responsibility. Otherwise, we see a chain reaction, and it is in everybody's interests to make sure that we lay down arms and that we move towards peace. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Ferrara. And now for 1.5 minutes, Ms. Dupont.
Chair, Honourable Commissioner. The Temporary Protection Directive has 3 goals: to provide immediate support, send a geopolitical signal, and not overburden national asylum systems. All 3 have been achieved. There are 4 million people from Ukraine in Europe. We support this directive. But there's one thing this directive or instrument cannot do: the practical implementation on the ground. From the beginning, it was clear that care, accommodation, access to the labour market and schooling would need clever organisation, and it would require resources being brought together. The Commission can only do so much. The Commission can provide technical support on the Solidarity Platform, but it's the Member States that actually have to implement this. The Member States at various levels have to provide accommodation and deal with energy prices. But with the upcoming winter, the challenges won't decrease. And we've seen that there have been attacks on infrastructure in recent days. But the Member States are doing their very best. Is the Temporary Protection Directive a one-size-fits-all instrument? It can be good, but the directive can never replace a wider migration pact. Some try to instrumentalize migration, I must say. Now, a final comment from me. War is always linked to food insecurity. We have a responsibility in the EU and outside of the EU. It's up to us to produce as much food as possible, and we must prevent anything that would reduce food production.
Thank you very much. Now for 1.5 minutes, Ms. Guillaume.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Among the lessons the Russian invasion of the Ukraine has taught us, it's that the EU can indeed absorb millions of refugees. A lot of talk has been made about this, and it shows that the temporary protection system should be implemented, and it does work. It had never been used, even though it dates back to 2001. But the wars and the population movements which result from them don't listen to things like that, and certain countries had to lobby the European Commission to act, and we need support for the NGOs and those people who are helping provide access to health care, jobs and education. Hope it'll be a precedent for future crises, which will definitely happen, but it's also important that we look at this when we talk about the Asylum and Migration Pact. This is proof that we need to do a positive reception for the people who are looking for help from us. Thank you very much.
Kollegin Guillaume.
Thank you very much, Ms. Guillaume. Now for 1 minute, Mr. Astrovicius.
Chair, Commissioner, dear colleagues. Putin's Russian aggression against peaceful Ukraine is destroying homes and lives. It is causing terror, uncertainty and pain for the people of Ukraine. Russian invasion of Ukraine has turned more than 7 million innocent Ukrainians into refugees, more than the entire population of Bulgaria, or 2 of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The brutal actions amount to a crime against humanity. Once again, I would like to thank all those who have taken Ukrainian refugees into their homes, cared of them, and provided them with a safe haven. It is a true demonstration of European humanism and solidarity. Only together can we overcome all the difficulties and defeat the enemy that threatens our lives and well-being. Slava Ukraini!
Thank you very much, Mr. Astrovicius. And now for 1 minute, Mr. Lagodinsky.
The future of Russia is no more at home. The future of Russia is sitting in the cold corridors of our migration agencies, in our towns and villages where Russian dissidents try to escape. The future has different faces and different genders and different origins and professions, but they are all united by their unwillingness to live in a murderous state. Prominent journalists, renowned writers, I know them, many of them were trying to help. Politicians who grabbed their children, small kids, and drove away before the police raided their homes, searching for them in order to imprison them for criticism of the war. 2 women raising a child went crazy fearing that this child will be taken away from them just because they are anti-Putin. We try to help, but we have to do more in order to help those who always opposed this war and opposed Putin. This Parliament has already called for introduction of a European-wide humanitarian visa program. This is what we have to do. This is not only our moral duty, this is our interest to save Russia, with which we will have to deal in the future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lagodinsky. For 1 minute, Ms. Wisniewska.
Panie Przewodniczący, Pani Komisarz.
President, Madam Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, 7 million Ukrainian citizens across the Polish border, women, children, they stayed and they are staying in Poland. Right now, there are almost 2 million of them. Poland is carrying the biggest cost of hosting the migrants, people who were fleeing Russian aggression. You are telling about many things. You are very emotional how we should help the Ukrainian people, but we should ask ourselves a question. How is the EU helping the country which bears the highest financial responsibility when it comes to Ukraine? This help is just an illusion. You, Commissioner, you were at the border. You know how the help in Poland really looks like. We opened our hearts, we opened our homes. Polish state is financing the education of Ukrainian children. We shelter them. Now it's time to act. We need concrete financial help. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you much, Ms. Wisniewska. The next speaker is Mr. Kubilius for 1 minute 30.
Dear colleagues, Russia as a terrorist country was and is weaponizing migration. Since last year, Russia started to weaponize illegal migration through Belarus of people from Africa and Middle East into Lithuania, Poland, Latvia. With the beginning of the brutal and criminal war against Ukraine, Russia was hoping that millions of war refugees from Ukraine will not be accepted in EU countries and chaos will prevail. Putin failed. Europeans showed their solidarity. With the recent mass bombings of civilian infrastructure in Ukraine before the winter, Putin expects that new millions of Ukrainians will be forced to leave the country. With the recent mass military mobilization in Russia, Kremlin created a new mass flow of migrants from Russia itself. In hundreds of thousands, they are going to Kazakhstan, Georgia, Armenia. Russians don't want to live in their terrorist country. That is an essence of today's Russia, and that is a tragedy of Russia. What should be our policy response? We need to keep our eastern borders under strict control vis-à-vis Putin's or Lukashenko manipulated migrants from Africa and Middle East. Second, we need to declare that we shall accept all the Ukrainians who will be forced to leave the country because of the Putin's war. And third, we need to financially help Kazakhstan, Georgia, Armenia, which accept massive flows of Russian refugees. With proper security precautions and according to our legislation on asylum, we need to be ready to accept those Russians who will become deserters from real Russian armed forces. Terrorist states will fail, whatever weapons, including weaponization of migration, they will try to use against us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kubilius. The next speaker is Mr. Reuten for 1 minute.
Speak in Dutch. Collega's, commissaris, veel dank voor uw persoonlijke inzet.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner, for your personal commitment. Now, if I think back to the beginning of the Russian invasion, then I think not so much of the attack on freedom, but on all the human suffering. And I think we saw a wave of solidarity towards Ukrainian refugees. Countries offered support and accommodation very quickly, made accommodation available, including in the Netherlands, something that I am very proud of. But at the same time, we are seeing people sleeping on the floor. We're seeing children standing out in the rain, and I feel ashamed of that as a Dutchman and as a European. Now we're seeing a new wave of refugees from Ukraine. Are we prepared for that? Now, of course, we must show humanity, particularly refugees who are fleeing violence, because bombs do not discriminate between different people.
Thank you, Mr. Reuten. The next speaker is Mr. Urchin for a minute. President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, on the 24th of February, Ukraine was attacked. The EU's reaction was immediate. By invoking the TPD, the Temporary Protection Directive, we have and had a good instrument to help Ukrainian nationals. Ukrainian people were welcomed by Europeans who opened up their homes and their hearts. Now there are the Russians who want to leave Putin's Russia. They are against his system, and we must provide them with safe haven, with refuge. These people from Russia must be afforded protection as Ukrainian nationals were. By way of conclusion, let me say something about the Migration Pact. The TPD is not a replacement or a response to the Migration Pact. I want to say something to some of the member states. Some of the member states say, yes, the EU must help, but these particular member states must end the gridlock against this Migration Pact too. Thank you very much, Mr. Urchin, says the President. The next speaker for 1 minute is Ms. Kemper.
Madam President, President, Commissioner. What have we got left of Schumann's Europe of solidarity and respect? One should try and find a reply to this question in the face of the brutal war in Ukraine. 9 billion zloty, 2.3 billion euros, that's what the Polish government spent to accommodate Ukrainians in Poland. It's the same amount as the amount spent that European Commission for support to all 27 member states. In Poland, we are doing everything to support our fighting neighbor in the face of the crisis, but here in the EU, a game is going on. The Polish money is being blocked. The Kremlin must be happy with this situation. It is very sad, but that's my message to you from many Polish citizens. 6 billion euro paid out to Turkey for receiving 3 million refugees, 1 billion per year. This is not about money. We are a proud nation, but please note that we really need your assistance. The speaker is interrupted.
Thank you, Ms. Kemper. The next speaker for 1 minute 30 is Mr. Zarzalejos.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President, Madam Commissioner. In the same way that we don't spare our criticisms when things are done poorly, we should highlight those which are working. The Temporary Protection Directive is working well. The financial effort to support refugees and reception countries has been sustained and substantial, and its real solidarity is being shown. We know that this area, real solidarity with the Ukrainians, is also crucial for Russian aggression to fail and for the European Union to show itself united against the aggressor. Nevertheless, we should be aware that in the midst of this humanitarian crisis, conventional migratory flows are continuing to increase. The figures for 2022 remind one of those of 2016, when the European Union went through what was then the biggest migratory crisis in its history, triggered by the conflict in Syria. From January to August, there was an increase of 75% of illegal entries into the European Union compared with the previous year. We are going into a situation which could be critical, could become critical very quickly. We need to find a European solution to re-establish the trust among the member states and to restore our citizens' trust in our ability to manage migration as a European Union. We can't allow any more extensions. The next crisis could be just around the corner if it isn't already here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zarzalejos. The next speaker is Mr. Kohut for 1 minute.
Pół roku temu, gdy setki tysięcy Ukraińców
Half a year ago, when hundreds and thousands of Ukrainians were fleeing the Russian war, then Polish citizens opened their homes and hearts for them. They opened their refrigerators and they gave them everything they had for weeks on end without looking at costs. It was the society and not the government that handled this challenge. People in Rybnik, Mysłowice, Częstochowa, other Polish cities who took responsibility for refugees. But today, the same people who were helping back then, they need help themselves. They need EU assistance because the country is being run by a poor government who are destroying the future of the Polish citizens, and the 75 billion because of cohesion money can be lost for Poland. Please create a mechanism where EU money can be transferred directly to local governments and NGOs. We will issue a letter to the European Commission on this tomorrow. Please give priority to this issue. EU funds for local government and not for the national government. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Kohut.
Thank you, Mr. Kohut. The next speaker for 1 minute is Mr. Kuchuk.
President, dear colleagues, Commissioner, I think Europe's answer to this devastating humanitarian crisis was quick and decisive. This was unprecedented and overwhelming support coming mainly from the citizens of the European Union, and I would like to thank them once more. It seems that we have learned our lessons, at least I hope that we have learned our lessons from precious crisis, and we must continue to take bold actions and to confront the challenges during the next phase of this humanitarian crisis. We open our doors to Ukrainians, to our friends from Ukraine, but also it's time to show solidarity with those coming from Russia, fleeing from Russia and seeking for refuge. As the winter approaches, the number of arrivals could increase again. Therefore, I think we need unanimity in full support to those escaping from the war is needed more than ever. We must guarantee that EU will proceed with long-term objectives and will implement the necessary reforms when it comes to migration. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Kyuchuk.
Thank you, Mr. Kyuchuk. The next speaker for 1 minute, that is Mr. Matsilis.
Dėkoju pirmininkė, komisarė, kolegos.
Thank you, Mr. President, Commissioner, Ministers, colleagues. Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine has produced many fatal consequences, among them unprecedented flows of migration to Europe since the very start of the war. Almost 4 million people have already asked for asylum. Timely action of NGOs, rapid reaction of our national governments, the Commission's decision to activate temporary protection directive, also decisions by the Commission and the Council to allocate necessary funds made it possible to stabilize the situation. In terms of GDP, the heaviest burden has fallen on the Baltic states and Poland, and also non-EU member Moldova. This burden means a long-lasting work of integration of refugees into the healthcare, social and education system, into the labor market. Also, we help Ukraine solve internal migration problems, and I am proud that Lithuania is in all this work. But the war is far from over. Russia has opted for criminal tactics and tries to compensate its losses on the battlefield by killing civilians and causing despair, by continuously bombing Ukraine's territory and its civil infrastructure, using modern weaponry which certain countries sell to Russia. Difficult winter is ahead of us. Therefore, I would like to ask, how well are we prepared for new flow of migrants from the Ukraine? Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Masch.
Thank you, Mr. Masilish. The next speaker is Ms. Kaliuran for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Commissioner. I will speak in Estonian. Venemaa agressioon Ukraina.
The Russian aggression against Ukraine has had an impact on migration in the European Union. First, we have refugees from Ukraine. I'm happy that countries bordering on such as Estonia also have supported the refugees from Ukraine. And this has been thanks to volunteers. But this cannot go on forever if member states do not help. We have to show solidarity. Then we have a migration wave from Russia. It's only right that we stopped issuing visas to Russian citizens, and many member states have also taken measures to limit tourism from Russia. I call on every member state to do that. It's not the time to allow tourism by Russian citizens to Europe. And thirdly, using people as a hybrid weapon. We've seen it in Karjala, we've seen it on the Belarusian-Lithuanian border. We have to be ready for such things. The European Union border has to stay protected. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you very much, Madam. The next speaker for 1.5 minutes is Mr. Bilčić.
Mr. President, Commissioner, colleagues. As Russia wages its brutal aggression against Ukraine, one of the most stark images of the war is the plight of Ukrainian citizens running with few belongings either across their country to safety or to neighboring countries. As Russia's destruction of civilian objects and infrastructure continues indiscriminately, these chilling images are among the most profound. Ukrainians today are the faces of refugees in Europe. I would like to thank all European citizens that have shown solidarity with Ukrainian refugees. European countries are sharing a disproportionate burden. Some are transition countries, some are becoming new homes to thousands of Ukrainians. To all those who actively volunteered, opened the doors of their homes, shared their meals, big thank you. Europeans have welcomed Ukrainians with open arms. Long before Russia's war on Ukraine, Russia and Belarus have used migration as a political tool to rattle European solidarity. Putin's regime's cold calculation is that Europe will not be able to manage Ukraine's refugees and will give into fierce migration bickering between member states. Well, let's be clear. We must prove Putin wrong. To Putin we say, get out of Ukraine, stop terrorizing its population, stop making people leave their homes, their jobs, their friends and families. We will never succumb to your methods. Europe will remain in solidarity with Ukrainian refugees And Europe will find a way to manage migration in a unified way. I'm convinced. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As Ms. Vincig is here, I will give the floor to Mr. Ressler.
Thank you very much, President. The whirlwind of war in Ukraine has started the greatest migrations in Europe from the Second World War. In the time of great uncertainty for the whole continent, we are witnessing a dramatic increase of illegal migrations on the Balkan route, with more than 100,000 illegal migrants only in this year. The situation is bad, but also it can be worse because of the actions of Serbia. By the unscrupulous use of the visa regime, it is using the countries that don't accept Kosovo and accept migrants during the night from countries that we didn't have before, like Burundi, India, and Cuba. The creation of migration pressure on the European border is opening another basic question, and this is the question of civil orientation of Serbia. In this crisis, it seems not a European country. If this continues to happen, the price of such politics is going to be paid by the citizens of Serbia. We cannot close our eyes towards this migration pressure, especially when we are talking about a regime that finds its model in Russia and also in its energy relations with Russia. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ressler. I give the floor to Mr. Didier for a minute and a half.
The European Union, and in France in particular, were there when it came to taking in Ukrainian citizens who were seeking to leave their country, fleeing from war. By granting them temporary protection status, all women, children, and old people who wished to leave Ukraine were able to do so and were taken in dignity across Europe. And they now number 4 million. That would not have been possible if our countries had kept on their territory all the illegal immigrants who have no business being there. Of 10 illegal migrants, 9 whose asylum applications are refused stay on the territory of France. And we now need to put an end to this weakness in the system, and that is to require asylum seekers to submit their applications abroad and to refuse any applications from anyone who does not respect those laws, because anybody who does not do so insults the traditions of welcome, which are to the credit of France and other countries in Europe. It's also an insult to Ukrainians who deserve a dignified and humane welcome on our part.
Didier, Thank you, Mr. Didier. Now it's Catch the Eye. Colleagues. We only have 5 minutes for Catch the Eye. This is an important debate though, so I'll try to give the floor to everyone. However, I will be very strict with the timing. Ms. Šojdrová will kick the Catch the Eye off.
Pane předsedající, jaký je dopad ruské invaze? Ukazuje se.
Thank you very much. Let's look at the Russian invasion and what it has shown. It has made it apparent that the Ukrainian people are suffering greatly, but it's also made it apparent that the Ukrainian people are resilient, and we should therefore award the Sakharov Prize to the people of Ukraine. And then there are also the member states Czech Republic, for instance, has welcomed some 450,000 refugees. We welcome them with open arms. They are our friends, but it does bring high costs with it. We expect the EU to show solidarity and to provide support, not just moral support, but also financial support. These costs, we need support with these costs so that we can provide refugees with everything they need. Temporary protection is currently working, but it's working because it is well targeted. The Temporary Protection Directive is not suitable for everyone, not for Russian refugees. They should apply for normal asylum, so to speak. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Šojdrová. The next speaker is Mr. Olekas.
Thank you, President. Madam Commissioner, first of all, I would like to thank you for the attention that you've shown to Ukrainian refugees right from the start of the war. The Temporary Protection Directive has been reactivated and financial support has been provided. And now the initiative to provide funds for NGOs is also welcome. I would also like to thank all Europeans who've received Ukrainians, also the Lithuanian people who've shown a lot of attention by opening their homes, by feeding the refugees and trying to find jobs for them. Madam Commissioner, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that Putin's aggression in Ukraine has caused other flows of migrants from Belarus. Those are people who do not support their authoritarian regime of Lukashenko, and they face the same problems here in Europe. So I would like to urge you to provide shelter and support to refugees from Belarus as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olekas. The next speaker is colleague Kurtzis.
Thank you, President. Putin tries to destroy and depopulate Ukraine. His objective is to create millions of refugees and destabilize the European Union. He already tried it in 2021 through Lukashenko. Since the Russian invasion in Ukraine, he developed this kind of hybrid war at an unprecedented scale. Nevertheless, his effort to destabilize EU member states had exactly the opposite effect. European citizens, governments, regional and local authorities warmly welcomed millions of Ukrainian refugees. A new dynamic was created in favor of European unification and Ukraine's EU membership. European solidarity proved an effective answer to Putin's hybrid war. Let us build on our big European success by increasing funding. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next speaker is Ms. Herzberger-Fofana.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La guerre nous a...
Thank you, President. This war has shown we're not forgetting our humanist values, showing solidarity to everybody fleeing Ukraine. All refugees deserve the same respect, without exception, but there is hidden racism, as we can see in differentiated treatment meted out to refugees. Africans in the Ukraine were held back at the borders of the European Union. Everyone has the right to flee a country at war, no matter what your colour of your skin is. Member states should allow foreign students who fled Ukraine to continue their studies without any bureaucratic hindrance. In fact, African students who were in Ukrainian universities and getting trained are faced with various obstacles in member states. They can't apply to our universities and they can't go back to their country of origin. Some member states are even demanding that they go home and then request a visa to continue their studies in an EU university. We call upon the member states of the European Union to receive people from minorities with the same compassion. Our solidarity should be complete, just because, as is the importance we drop to in education.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Daly.
Suffering across the world is at unprecedented levels, and the number of people in need of humanitarian assistance at an all-time high. Even before the war in Ukraine, 82 million people were facing food insecurity and 86 million people were displaced, and undoubtedly those figures are far higher now. But here in Europe, we've built a fortress to keep them out, and the walls are just getting higher. Visas for Afghans have dried up, and as the UN humanitarian coordinator for Somalia put it, funds for emergencies are drying up too because Ukraine seems to suck all the oxygen that is in the room. In Brussels, Afghan men are put on the streets and the Red Cross closes its operation to everybody except Ukrainians. I am glad and proud of our prompt and broad welcome for all Ukrainian refugees, but Afghans didn't start the war and Somali children aren't trying to keep it going. So why should they suffer from our two-tier racist migration policy? It's not good enough. We need to work on this and work to end the war.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Daly.
Thank you, Ms. Daly. Now I give the floor to colleague Tomac.
Thank you, President. Madam Commissioner, I've been to Ukraine in the first days of the war, of the Russian war. I've been in many Ukrainian regions in these last couple of months in order to support people who are in danger. I brought 6 children and 3 mothers who ran from war into my house. I am fully aware of what's going on there, but I believe that we don't phrase this problem right, because the tyrant, Putin, launched this war in order to sanction the Ukrainians just because they want to be part of the European Union. They want to get rid of this pressure now that Moscow puts on them. And we need to understand that these 7 million Ukrainians that are refugees now did not leave the country because they wanted to come to Europe. I believe that we need to understand the essence of this war and not to have any reserves anymore and when it comes to supporting the Ukrainians. Thank you.
Catch the eye for...
Thank you. To end Catch the Eye, Ms. Marques. President, Commissioner, the EU has received millions of refugees fleeing from war caused by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But there's been a wave of solidarity, and I think we've all been touched by that. Did everything go perfectly? No. Many students of African origin were at Ukrainian universities, and they encountered bigger problems. But will the Commission speed up the process for them? Well, I would say, however, that European solidarity has and is working. Those who've been helping, those who've arrived should enjoy access to various services, and the temporary protection directive was invoked for the first time since the year 2001. Now, Commissioner, what lessons can we learn from this crisis? How can this crisis cause the Member States to change their conduct in the future? Thank you very much. That ends Catch the Eye. And now, to wind up the debate, I give the floor to Commissioner Johansson.
Thank you, President, and thank you all for this very important debate and for your strong commitment. Putin is responsible for this terrible war. He wants to destroy Ukraine. He wants to destroy the Ukrainian as a people. But we should not be naive. He also would like to destroy the European Union. Putin is a threat also towards us, and the security threat in the European Union is rising. And we need to act to protect ourselves. The right to apply for asylum, also for Russian citizens, remain untouched. But the possibility to get a tourist visa in the European Union is not a fundamental right and should be strictly restricted for Russian citizens. Putin must lose. It's the only way to end this crisis. And we must continue to support Ukrainians in Ukraine. We have mobilized so far €10 billion in humanitarian, emergency and military aid. Another €5 billion is in the pipeline. We are preparing for winter. And Many of you have recognized, and thank you very much for that, for the unprecedented decision that when member states agreed to my proposal to activate the temporary protection directive. So far, 4.3 million Ukrainians have registered for a temporary protection. But since May, every week we have seen more people leaving the European Union back to Ukraine and coming in the other direction. So quite a high number of Ukrainians are now back in Ukraine. I met some of them when I was in Kiev in August. And it's clear that those that have registered for a temporary protection, when they go back to Ukraine, they are no longer refugees. They should deregister from temporary protection. But they're afraid to do so, because they say, well, if bombs start falling again, as they are right now, they need to quickly come back to the European Union, and they are welcome back to the European Union when things get worse. That's why we have been working together with the member states, together with the Ukrainian government, to make sure what we say, you can always go back to Ukraine, and you do not need to deregister, but you need to notify the member state where you have registered that they are going back to Ukraine. But you can keep your registration, so it's easy to come back to the EU if things get worse. Many of you, some of you raised the money. So as I said in the beginning, we have allocated all the 4 million euro in emergency assistance that we promised for protection of borders and for dealing with the refugees. We have supported the member states most affected, and the biggest share has gone to Poland. We have also made sure that 30% of these funds will go to NGOs and local authorities. Concerning food insecurity, we must get the grain out of Ukraine, and we are taking action. Between May and August, EU solidarity lanes carried more than 11 million tons of grains, oilseeds and other products out of Ukraine. And we provide a total of 7.7 billion in support for food insecurity as part of global gateway investments in partner countries. Food insecurity could bring conflict, increase criminal and terrorist threat, and provoke social unrest. These could provoke people to flee. So far, we are not seeing this happen, but we remain vigilant. We are closely following the developments. And to conclude, dear honourable members, since February, we as the European Union have shown what we can achieve when we work close together, united, to deal with the migration crisis. We should use these lessons learned of what we can achieve when we actually cooperate in a positive way, to use that on the Pact on Migration and Asylum, to make sure that this pact will be adopted during this mandate. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Kiitokset komissaari Johansson.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. Thank you for those words. We've now concluded that debate. The next item on the agenda is the Commission statement on setting up a comprehensive framework for missing children and missing persons at risk. The first speaker will be Mrs. Johansson, the Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President, honourable members. I know my colleague, Vice President Dubravka-Šuica, would very much have liked to be here. We work very closely together to protect children. Each year, thousands of children are reported missing in the European Union. Run away from home, abducted by a parent or a stranger, fall victims of violence, abuse and exploitation. Also unaccompanied migrant children, trafficked, lost or injured, or even worse. Next month, Missing Children Europe will turn 20 years of protection in action. Its European hotline for missing children, 116,000, operates in 32 countries. A free and 24/7 service. Any child friend, family member or teacher can call for immediate help. The EU supports with funding. We must all work together in the European Union. Police and helplines, child protection services, judges, civil society organisations, our whole society. Today, Member States' authorities are finding missing people using the Schengen Information System for law enforcement information exchange. Last year, the Schengen Information System contained more than 150,000 alerts on missing persons. And 7,500 Schengen information hits helped to find missing persons and bring them to safety. That's much more than the year before. From next month on, the Schengen Information Service will do an even better job when its revised system will be fully operational. Better use of biometrics will make it easier to identify missing persons.